Well, benedicite Dominus, and welcome to question 43 of the Secunda Secundae of St. Thomas Aquinas. The topic for this lecture is scandal, and I am Dr. Thibault. So we are looking at the final vice in contrast to charity. We've looked at hatred, which is contrary to charity in itself. We looked at sloth and envy, which were contrary to joy, which is a part of charity. And now we've looked at those vices which are contrary to peace. Those are in the green here. And now we are looking at the final section, which is scandal, which is contrary to beneficence. Now, beneficence is a good action, right? It's acting well. Joy and peace are interior. Beneficence is an exterior act. So scandal is an exterior act as well. So this is a fairly long one with 8 articles, so hold on, we'll make it through it. So scandal is a form of spiritual downfall, right? So it's coming from the Greek term skandalon, which means an obstacle or a stumbling block, stumbling stone. Right? St. Peter was a scandalon, right? You'll be a... Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I shall build my church. He was both a rock as in a foundation, but also a scandalon, right? A stumbling stone as well. Something, St. Thomas calls it, something less rightly done or said that occasions another spiritual downfall. So scandal is something you do that will lead to another's spiritual downfall, right? So if you commit adultery, that is a sin in and of itself. But if now others see that you have committed adultery and you are supposed to be an upstanding role model within the church, now you have an additional sin of scandal because now somebody else might not even try to be good and holy because they looked up to you and you have led them to despair. Right now they're despairing, and it leads them to a spiritual downfall, right? Maybe not all the way to the bottom, but they might be heading down rather than ascending up, right? That's an idea. Now, is scandal a sin? St. Thomas, throughout this whole section, talks about passive scandal versus active scandal. So passive scandal is scandal which happens to you, right? You're the observer of this action which scandalizes, which you would think, well, you're the innocent one, right? You're the one that saw the scandal, so it's not really your fault, right? Well, that's one way of looking at it, but it's not the way St. Thomas looks at it, because you could witness somebody committing adultery. It doesn't mean you have to lose faith. It doesn't mean you need to copy them, right? You should know better, right? You should admonish them or pray for them, or or it has no effect on your life, right? But you don't have to be scandalized by it, right? It doesn't need to lead to a downfall of your faith. Other people's actions doesn't mean to be a downfall of your faith. Now, this is a very important spiritual lesson for people today, because if you were to ask many non-practicing Catholics, well, why are you a non-practicing Catholic? People always have a story about what somebody else did, which causes them not to be faithful to their faith, right? Faithful to their faith, right? Pious to their faith. Well, they were scandalized. Okay. But they still made a decision, right? You still had to say, well, because this happened, therefore I am no longer going to remain a faithful person, right? Well, you could say, well, what does that have to do with you, right? That priest was a jerk. What does that have to do with you? What does it have to do with God? What does it have to do with anything, right? This would be, why are you scandalized? So there is an important element of you being moral in terms of being passively scandalized, right? So you have to succumb to the scandalization. So you have to participate in being scandalized in the passive scandal, and it leads to your spiritual downfall. It's not about them. It leads to your spiritual downfall. So you have to take ownership for your spiritual life, right? So if it leads to your spiritual downfall, then you should safeguard against that. So you are responsible for your passive scandal. There is also active scandal, which is the person who scandalizes, right? Well, they are clearly responsible as well, right? That would be clearly a sin if you are actively engaging in scandalizing. It could be in two ways, right? St. Thomas points out one way, well, because of the sin you committed, you're sinning, right? So let's say you are caught in the act of adultery. Well, the adultery itself is a sin, right? So scandal is a sin because you are sinning, right? It's an additional sin, is the scandal, but you are already sinning to begin with. The second way is maybe you weren't sinning, but you were leading others to sin. There was an intentionality there of leading others to sin. And an example I could think of this would be something like, let's say you were in AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and part of the rules would be that you don't consume alcohol, right? Not just in moderation, not at all, right? That the idea in AA is not at all. And you create a community of people in AA who support one another in remaining sober. So let's say you were to go out with your AA friends and you say, well, I'm just going to have one glass of wine, right? Well, is it sinful to drink one glass of wine? No, it's not sinful, but you are becoming a stumbling block for your neighbor who's trying to be sober. You could say, well, you have committed to not drinking. Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know. Does one drink make you an alcoholic? Not necessarily. But for the sake of the common good, right, the sake of that AA community, you shouldn't be engaging in alcohol consumption, right? Probably shouldn't do it at all. If you were to do it with somebody who's not in AA. Don't do it in front of people in AA. One time I gave a talk to a young Jewish group. It was run by Orthodox Jews. I did it on the law and the law related to religious things. And we were out at a restaurant, and one of the people ordered a bacon cheeseburger. And as soon as he ordered it, I said, well, how are you eating a bacon cheeseburger? We're at an Orthodox Jewish event. And he said, well, I'm not kosher. And the rabbi afterwards came up to me and said, I'm so glad that you said that, because although the person might be reformed, right, it might not follow kosher, at an Orthodox event, it's really not appropriate to be ordering a bacon cheeseburger at an Orthodox Jewish event. Because of the scandal, right? You could have just ordered something else, right? You didn't have to order that, right? So this is the active scandal, right? Even if it's not sinful in itself, if the thing you're doing is kind of intentionally scandalizing, it's a scandal. Now, is scandal a special sin, right? So now we're breaking this down even more, right? So we went from two categories, passive and active, to passive and two different forms of active. So let's go through this. So in terms of passive scandal, He says, this is not special, right? So picture it this way, right? You're out in the world, and most people in our society call themselves Christian or believers in some way, right? So you see people in some way. Well, this person who has a Jesus bumper sticker or something, they cut you off and give you the finger on the road. And then you go into the grocery store, and the person who's working there has a gold cross around their neck, and they're swearing up a storm, and they're talking about all types of terrible stuff with the bagger at the register, right? This is just life. This is how it goes. There are hypocrites out there, right? There are scandalizers out there, and if all it took was, if I see one bad actor, I'm just going to copy them, or I'm going to abandon my faith entirely. Well, if that were to be true, you wouldn't last 2 days as a Christian, right? This is a ridiculous thing to say. Well, there's, as soon as I see one bad Christian, I'm going to give up on Christianity. Well, you won't be a Christian very long, right? Right. Likewise, if you were to be Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist, if you said, as soon as I see somebody of my faith who acts badly, I'm going to abandon my faith. Well, you won't be a member of any faith for very long, because all faiths are made up of very imperfect people, and it's your duty not to be scandalized by that, right? And so in that way, it's not special, it's common, right? This is a very common element of being a virtuous person and to being a faithful person, right? This isn't special in any way. This is the most common thing possible, right? So this is in terms of passive scandal. Now, in terms of active scandal, is active scandal special? And St. Thomas says, well, there's accidental active scandal. So this is when a person is not intending to scandalize, but they just intend to satisfy their own will, right? So, like the example of the person at the Orthodox event who is Jewish, but who orders the bacon cheeseburger. I don't think they did that with the purpose of upsetting anyone. They did it because they wanted to eat a bacon cheeseburger, right? They were just pursuing their own will, right? They did it because that's what they wanted to do. It was a Jewish scandal, right? It's not a Christian scandal, but it's a Jewish scandal what they did. But it wasn't intentional. It was accidental, right? It was an accidental scandal. Probably most scandals are probably accidental scandals, right? Most people aren't intending to scandalize people. Most people are intending to they're stuck in their own heads, doing their own thing, living their own life, and they're not particularly worried about what other people's holiness. They're probably not concerned with their own holiness, right? If you're not concerned with your own holiness, you're certainly not concerned about anybody else's holiness and your effects on other people. That's the majority of people today, right? There is also then the issue of an active, direct scandalizer, right? So that previous one, that is not special. That is just what everybody does, right? It's just common. It's common, right? Now, active direct is special. This is a special kind of sin. And it's one that leads people into a scandalized life, right? Leads people into sin, and they do so intentionally, right? The thing I'm thinking of now would be something like, the Madison Cawthon, the American congressman from North Carolina, who another politicians said to him, "Hey, do you want to come over to our house for an orgy?" Right? Well, this is not accidental. This is direct, right? This is saying, we are going to sin openly. Would you like to come and sin openly with us? You weren't going to go to an orgy, but would you like to come to our orgy? Right? These politicians, I tell you, right? This is active, right? Same situation from Madison Carthon, right? Somebody, politician, is snorting cocaine, right? If they're doing it for their own will, pursuing their own will, right? Accidental, that could be a scandal accidentally, right? It can be a sin in and of itself as well, but it's also a sin in terms of scandal accidentally. But if they say to you, hey, do you want some cocaine? Now, they're not doing it, pursuing their own will. They are leading you into it as well, right? So now it's an active scandal. And why is this a special sin? What is it going specifically against? Right? The other ones just go against virtue in general, right? But this goes against a specific virtue, which is fraternal correction, right? So if your neighbor were to be engaging in orgies, what you should say is, that's not very becoming, right? Right? You should correct them in their orgies, or they have an addiction to cocaine, or they use cocaine. Maybe the correct thing would be fraternal correction, right? Getting them help and reaching out to them in some way, in a pastoral way, right? That would be an appropriate response to it, right? Offering people cocaine is not helpful, right? Just like somebody who's offering an alcoholic alcohol, right? This is leading them into failure, right? So that would be an active, direct, versus if you just want to drink and you don't care that they're an alcoholic, that might be active, accidental, right? Interesting things. I don't know if you find it interesting. I find it interesting. Number 4, we're halfway there. Is scandal a mortal sin? Well, most things can be a mortal sin or not, right? So in terms of passive scandal, it could be venial, could be mortal, right? If the thing that they're doing is very bad and you were to follow them in their example of doing a very bad thing, that would be mortal, right? And if the thing they were doing was very small, maybe it's only a venial sin for you, right? Because you're mirroring what the other person is doing, right? You mirror the scandalizer. Then the scandalizer commits a venial sin, then you committed a venial sin. If they commit a mortal sin, you committed a mortal sin. Kind of, that's how it goes, right? The other way is active accidental, right? Could be venial, could be mortal, right? Same reasoning, right? If you are the active one in this and you were to do something very small, not that bad, right? Maybe it was only venial. If you did something terrible, then it could be mortal, right? So it depends on what you did, right? Did you have to be careful what I say. I don't want to offend anyone, but did you do something small? Was it a small backbiting, right? Small little backbiting, or were you outright trashing the person, right? Were you just ripping them apart, right? There is a difference between a snide little comment, might be venial sin, and trashing somebody, right? That would be a mortal sin, right? The degree of backbiting would matter in that regard. Now, how about active direct, right? This would be that you're sinning in some way, or you're intentionally leading people into the sin, right? This is always a mortal sin, right? Because charity is the love of God for God's own sake, the enjoyment of God, the abiding in God, friendship with God. And from this charity comes the love of neighbor, which, since our neighbor abides in God, we love our neighbor for God's sake. And we treat our neighbor as another self, right? So if we treat our neighbor as another self and we love them for the sake of God, if we were then to lead them into sin through our scandal, we are not loving them. Right? We are not loving them as we love ourselves. We are not loving them because we love God. Right? That's not happening. We are damaging, if we were to punch our neighbor, it would not be very loving. If we were to lead them into sin so that the devil punches them, that is also not good, right? Now, can the perfect be scandalized, right? So let's say you're the perfect. We don't usually hear these words in the secunda secundae, the perfect, but let's say you are perfect, we are perfectly in charity, right? This is the idea that we are perfectly in charity. We never really get there in this life. We are only imperfectly charitable. In the next life, we get to be perfectly charitable because we no longer have desire. But in this life, we don't usually get there. But let's say we're as close to there as we can, right? The perfect. Can the perfect be scandalized? And the answer is no. You cannot be scandalized if you are in perfection. Why can you not be scandalized if you are perfect? You would think, those good and holy monks that walk around, they must be easily scandalized, right? We must think that, right? The good and holy priest, they would be easily scandalized, right? Well, they might be easily shocked. There's a difference between scandalized and shocked. So scandalized would mean it's leading to their spiritual downfall, right? So the good and holy priest who isn't around steeped in sin, his life isn't steeped in sin, he's kind of lived amongst other saints. If they see something sinful, they don't jump into the sinfulness, they're repulsed by it, right? Ooh, what are you doing, right? You're going to church and you see teenage girls, especially 16-year-old, 15-year-old girls. They like to be rebellious in the summertime in modern parishes. You might come in with these little shorts that are like, that big, barely covering anything, and these short shirts coming off with no arms or something like this. You could say, well, you could scandalize the holy people there. Well, if the person is perfect in their faith, they won't be scandalized by it. They might be disappointed at you, right? They might be shocked by it. They might be, they might not like it, but they're not going to lose faith because of it. They're not scandalized because of it, right? You're able to see other people as other people, and you know who God is, and you know your relationship with God, and nothing anyone does is going to have an effect on that, right? St. Thomas uses, he says, therefore, scandal is not found in those who adhere to God perfectly by love, right? It doesn't have an effect on them. Also, he uses a quote from Psalm 118, much peace have they that love thy law, and to them there is no stumbling block, right? There is no scandalum, right? Stumbling block, right? When you love God perfectly and you love your neighbor perfectly, what are you going to do, right? This often comes with older age, right? St. Thomas points this out, that you get this with older age. If you've been in religious life long enough, you're bound to find some priests that just, who knows what's going on in their head, right? You're going to find a priest that's going to be, I don't like Mary, and I don't like, I don't like adoration, and maybe, hopefully, those priests are going to be phased out eventually. But when I was young and in religious life, this was they were fairly common. But they God only knew what was going to come out of some people's mouths. You only knew. But after you've been steeped in the faith, right? You know the Gospels, you know the faith, you know what you're doing. When you see the person who, I don't believe in angels or whatever, does it have an effect on you? Well, you pray for them, right? Well, but it's not going to change. It's not going to change anything. It's somebody who's weak in their faith, right? Very imperfect faith, who's going to let some other human being debase their belief of God, who is perfect and right. I don't know. This is what we need more of: is people who have more of a perfect love of God, who just don't care about all of the nonsense, right? Just to think I'm dependent upon the nonsense not existing. Well, that's not this church, or any church, right? For that matter. Now, would the perfect give scandal? Would the perfect scandalize? And the answer is pretty obviously here, no, right? And clearly not, because scandalizing is bringing the downfall of another spiritual life. Well, what saint would do that, right? That's not something a saint would do, right? In terms of accidental, you would be hyper aware of how your actions affect other people, right? That's what a good and holy person would do. You would be aware of your neighbor as much as you're aware of yourself, right? So you wouldn't fall into those accidental scandals. And in terms of direct scandals, right, you either have to be sinning or intending to lead a person into sin. Somebody who's perfect, who has perfect love of God, would not do that, right? So no, perfect people would not do that. Now, they might do something small, accidentally, very small thing, right? He said, the perfect may get little things wrong, but nothing which elevates to the light of reason, right? Right? As an example, I could think of it, that you only have to fast during Lent when you're certain ages, right? You can get so old that you don't have to fast now. I don't remember. I think it's like 65 or something like that. It's not that old. So there's people who might look a little bit younger or something like this, or people might not know all the rules. And the person can say, well, I don't have to fast in Lent because I am above the age of fasting. But it could still provide scandal if the people who you're around don't know that you're over the age or something like that, right? If you go out to breakfast at the parish and you order bacon on Good Friday, that might be a little uncouth, right? You don't have to fast, but, might not hurt, right? If you could, right? If you're out in public and you're a priest, you might not want to order bacon on Good Friday, right? Maybe not. Even if you are around the age where you are technically allowed not to, right? So if you were to scandalize, if you are a scandalizer, should you hold back from spiritual goods, right? This is the question 7. We're almost towards the end. And St. Thomas points out these two categories, and we use this both for Article 7 and Article 8. So there's the scandal of the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees, they scandalize our Lord's teaching, and they do it with malice, and we can hold them in contempt. There's also the scandal of the little ones, which is out of weakness or out of ignorance. I think the scandal of the little ones is easier to explain. When I was first entered religious life when I was young, there was somebody who entered a year or two after me, I think the year after me, but he was not, his father was a deacon, but he wasn't particularly bound to a lot of the rules of the church. He didn't really spend much time. He was more of a guitar mass type Catholic. And here we were at an event where you had 100 seminarians, from the people who were in their first year to people who are already deacons, right? And everybody in between. And we were about to go in for Mass. So we're all hanging out front of the chapel waiting for the bell to ring and to go into Mass. And he goes into the dining hall and comes back with a giant cookie, and he's just chomping on his cookie, seconds before the bell's going to ring for us to go into Mass. And we all kind of look at him like, aren't you aware you should be fasting? We're going into Mass, right? If you're eating 2 seconds before Mass starts, then Mass isn't going to be going over an hour. It's just a daily Mass. You won't have that 1 hour of fasting before going to communion. And don't you know? And he said, oh, but I was hungry. Right? He didn't do it any malice. There was no malice, and there was no intention of pulling anybody else into scandal, right? Pulling anyone else into sin. He had the scandal of little ones, right? He had absolutely no idea. I think the first Lent of his first year in formation, he stopped eating meat throughout all of Lent because he thought that was the rule. And halfway through Lent, he was complaining about it. And, well, you realize you don't have to stop eating meat every day, just Fridays. And, oh, really? He didn't make it. He was young and attractive, and everybody thought he would be a wonderful priest, but he didn't quite have that discipline. So that was the faith. That's the scandal of little ones. So should they be, should you withhold from them spiritual benefits or something like this? Well, not really, right? Maybe you should say, as you're eating the cookie, well, maybe abstain from Eucharist today, but you're not in any type of grave sin because it was done out of weakness. It was done out of ignorance. It wasn't done out of any type of malice or any way. Right? He wasn't saying, I know the rule and the rule is stupid, so I'm not going to follow it because I don't believe in that nonsense. Right? He wasn't doubting the church's teaching at all. He just was completely unaware of it. Right? Completely unaware of it. Despite going to Catholic high school and his father being a deacon, he was unaware of the fasting rules for Mass, right? Welcome to the year 2000. Now, the scandal of Pharisees is different, right? These people are hypocrites, and they intend to tear down the good for the sake of them being the good, right? They are vicious people, right? The scandal of Pharisees, right? These are the ones who condemn, be careful what I say, but they're the ones that are condemning everyone and everything, and then they get caught with having pornography on their computers and everything else when they're priests. These are the people who have set up a hypocrisy, right? They're ready to damn everyone, and they're guilty of it themselves. So what's the response to people like that? A level of contempt, right? And withholding of the spiritual goods, right? Because the proper response to them is repent, right? Repent of your malice, right? What's the response to the scandal of the little ones? Educate them, right? And St. Thomas points this out where, let's say that seminarian who was eating the cookie, you tell him, actually, you should be fasting for at least an hour before Mass, right? Before receiving communion. So at least a half hour, if you're looking to do the minimum, at least a half hour before Mass, you should probably refrain from eating for Mass. If he responds well, that's good, right? That's good. If he says, well, I'm going to do it anyway, I don't care, right? Well, now he is now moved into a different type of scandal, right? He knows better and he chooses not to. Now it's malice, right? Now you can move it to another direction. If they just are unaware, then the proper response is to educate them, right? And lastly, same thing, but should they be withheld from temporal goods? Should temporal goods be withheld? So this one you have to look at in terms of almost the opposite. So in this one, in terms of what are they accusing you of, right? Who's accusing you? So let's say you are at a parish and you are the priest and your family is very wealthy and you are an only child and your parents left you all of their money and you inherited millions of dollars, right? Now, as a parish priest, you're a millionaire, right? And you're a little bit older in life, and you only have 20 or 30 years left to enjoy this money, and you decide, I'm going to get a new Cadillac, brand new Cadillac, 2022 Cadillac. Get it in black, the priest colors, so you can drive it to the funerals and stuff. But I'm going to get a brand new Cadillac, right? Now, none of it came from the church's money. This was family money you inherited. You can do whatever you want with it. Maybe you even gave $1 million to the missions in Haiti, right? You gave $1 million, but you wanted to get this new Cadillac for yourself. I don't know how much a new Cadillac is, but something like that. I don't know, $60,000. I don't know, $100,000. I don't know what a new Cadillac costs, but a lot. But maybe you gave even more away to charity, right? But maybe. Well, with the parishioners at your parish, when they see this new car, right? Maybe you're at a just simple, lower middle class parish. How will they respond to seeing you driving this car, right? Are you scandalizing the faithful, right? Maybe there are people who it's a stretch for them to put $20 in the basket, but they stretch in order to do that, right? For the love of God, they give till it hurts in order to support the parish. Who, they might hear all the time the parish might close, it doesn't have enough money, the roof needs to be fixed, the parking lot, everything else. And they see you driving up in a new Cadillac. Scandal? Maybe, right? But this is kind of like the scandal of the little ones, right? These are simple people who think, well, I give everything I can, and I give it to the church, and the church supports the priest, and now the priest has a new car, right? They might not know all of the things about your inheritance, your family, and all these other things, right? So what would be the best response, right? What should you do in that case? Well, it would be good if you were the priest of that parish to explain that you inherited money and you gave $1 million to the missions in Haiti, and you gave money to this, and you decided you're going to get this one car, and this car is going to be your car for, a while, and you wanted to get a good one, and you always wanted a Cadillac, black Cadillac, and you got it, right? And you explain it to them, right? It didn't come from the collection money. I actually saved the parish money by getting my own car so the parish didn't have to buy me one, right? Explain it, right? And if you can explain it and everyone goes, yeah, that's fine, right? No problem, right? This isn't a problem. If you can't do that, or you can't explain it, or maybe it's not a new car, maybe it's a new boat, or fancy vacations all the time, right? Or whatever it is, right? Now maybe you can't defend it so much, right? So maybe you do have to forgo those temporal goods for the sake of not scandalizing the little ones, right? Simple people who don't get to go on vacation, get new cars, don't own a boat, right? And their priest does, right? This could be a scandal to the faithful. Might have to refrain. Now, how about the scandal of the Pharisees? You don't have to give up temporal goods for them, because they will never be satisfied with no matter what you do. No matter how poorly you live, it's not going to be poor enough. No matter how much money you give to the poor, not going to be enough. No matter how many prayers you say, or how devoted you are, or how many years you've given, they're still going to find something to attack you about. For people like that, you can't win. So don't bother trying, right? You can explain it, you can defend it. If they are not scandalized because of their good faith, right? A good faith scandal, right? Don't worry about it. Right? Very big difference between the good and holy, simple person sitting in the pews and somebody who's just looking to attack you no matter what you do, right? One you should try to be sensitive to and not scandalize, and the other one, live your life, right? Live a good, holy life, but you don't have to live to try to satisfy them, because, again, they won't be satisfied. It's like no matter what Jesus did. He eats, oh, you're a glutton. You don't eat, why are your people fasting, right? No matter what you do, they're going to find something to complain about, right? So in conclusion, scandal is a stumbling block which leads to another's downfall. Scandal is a sin because you don't want others to have a downfall, right? And you shouldn't fall down yourself when you see sin, right? That shouldn't be your response. Scandal can be a special sin, right? It's the opposite of fraternal correction. In other ways, it's like just common, right? It's just common that there's going to be scandal and you should respond appropriately. Scandal can be a mortal sin. It could be a venial sin, right? Ideally, you wouldn't be scandalized at all, right? Now, the perfect cannot be scandalized because no matter what they see, they're steadfast in their faith and it's not going to change whatever anyone else does, right? The perfect cannot give scandal, right? If you are perfect, you won't lead other people into scandal. You would be aware of your brothers and sisters, be cognizant of your actions and how it affects them, and you would not lead them into sin accidentally or directly. Now, foregoing spiritual goods, there's a difference between the Pharisees, the scandal of the Pharisees, and the scandal of the simple, right? We're very flexible with accommodating the simple, and in terms of temporal goods, we explain ourselves in order not to scandalize them, right? But if you have to withhold from a temporal good in order not to scandalize, you should, right? Even St. Paul talked about, you can eat the meat of idols because they don't exist. The idols don't really exist, right? They're not pagan gods because they don't exist. So you could eat the meat. It doesn't matter. But he points out that, if simple people think that the idols do exist and you're eating meat in front of the idols, then they could have their faith confused. In that case, it's better not to eat the meat of idols if it causes scandal, right? It's better not to drink if it causes scandal. If it doesn't cause scandal, go for it. But if it causes scandal, don't do it, right? For the sake of the simple, right? That's a biblical term. In terms of going out of your way to satisfy the Pharisees, you'll never satisfy the Pharisees, so don't bother trying, right? Or you can try, but you don't have to you are not morally responsible for making them happy because they will never be happy. Okay, that's it now for vices, and now we will move on to the precepts and then the gifts, and then we will be done with charity. Have a great day.